The North Atlantic, in the winter of 1942, does not roar, it gnaws. It gnaws at the hull of His Majesty's ship, Vigilant, a Flower-class corvette assigned to Convoy HX-228, and it gnaws at the edges of every man's resolve with the slow, indifferent persistence of ice forming on the bridge rails. I stood there at dawn watch, gloved hands white-knuckled on the cold steel of the binnacle, my breath curling in the half-light like smoke from a dying fire. The sea was not angry. Not, truly not, like the tempests off Newfoundland that could fling a man overboard before he knew he'd de-slipped, but it was watchful, as though it held its breath, waiting for us to make a mistake. I was Lieutenant Alistair Kane, 28 years of age, commissioned from the Royal Naval College in '38. And by God's grace, or bureaucratic oversight, placed in command of this 30-odd crew, tasked with shepherding 40 merchantmen across 5,000 miles of U-boat-infested darkness. There were no heroes aboard the Vigilant, only tired men, most of them conscripts from fishing villages along the Clyde or the Mersey who knew the sea better than they knew the King's face, but were unaccustomed to depth charges shuddering through their bones at 03:00 hours. That morning, the fog lay thick as wool batting, muffling even the steady thrum of our triple expansion engine below. The escort Group 2 corvettes, a destroyer, and a rescue tug maintained strict radio silence per Admiralty directive, ZB-17, relying instead on Aldous lamps and signal flags for communication. Every blink of light across the grey void felt like a confession, whispered too loudly, and in that silence, the memory of last night's attack still clung to my throat like tar. At 2,217 hours, the Dutch freighter Amstel Gracht went down 12 miles astern, torpedoed amidships by what we later identified from intercepted Enigma chatter, decrypted at Bletchley as U-338, under Captain Lieutenant Ralph Roop. We dropped 6 depth charges on a sonar contact bearing 215 degrees, but the hydrophones returned only the empty groan of the deep, and the distant creak of stressed metal, whether ours or theirs. None could say. No debris surfaced. No oil slick. Just the sea swallowing another secret. Another score of lives. Without so much as a ripple, I had given the order to cease attack and rejoin the convoy. Standard procedure. Necessary. But as I stood now in the pallid dawn, watching the silhouette of the Empire, gannet laden with steel plate from Halifax rise, and fall like a weary lung on the swell, the weight of that decision pressed upon my ribs like a diver's belt. Had I been too cautious, or too eager to prove myself by hunting a shadow? There were no answers. Only echoes, the echo of my own voice over the tannoy, crisp and assured, as if I hadn't felt my stomach hollow out at the first explosion. The echo of young Jenkins, our signalman, vomiting over the starboard rail after we pulled one survivor from the water, a steward from the Amstel Gracht, half-frozen, babbling in Dutch about fire in the galley. Though the torpedo had struck the engine room, the cold had seeped into my greatcoat, into the marrow of my spine. I could smell the wet wool, the faint temps of diesel, the brine rot on the deck planks. Somewhere below, the cook was stoking the galley stove. The scent of burnt porridge and tea leaves drifted up through the companionway. Normalcy, then, at 064, 2 hours. The ASDIC operator Petty, Officer Mel, a quiet man with hands permanently stained by grease and saltly into the vote. Contact, sir. Bearing 087. Range approximately 2,000 yards. Slow, but definite. Rhythm suggests a Type VIIC on electric motors. My lips moved. Hold course. Reduce speed to 8 knots. Prepare depth charges. Signa HMS Vigilant, possible U-boat ahead of convoy axis. But no sound came out. Not at first. Not audibly. My tongue shaped the words, my chest expanded with breath, yet the voice that should have carried authority died somewhere, between larynx and lip strangled, by a sudden paralyzing awareness that whatever lay beneath us was not just a steel hull with torpedoes and men in grey. It was a mirror, and in choosing to hunt it, I would either redeem last night's failure or compound it with more graves. I cleared my throat. Tried again. This time, the order emerged thin, perhaps, but serviceable. Mallory nodded and vanished below. Around me, The crew moved with the quiet efficiency, bred of dread and routine. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. Ik knew. The sun, weak and diffused by cloud, barely touched the waves. Somewhere ahead, the convoy plodded on, blind and trusting. And below, in the black water, something waited silent, patient, listening. I gripped the rail until my fingers ached, and I prayed not to God, for I had long since doubted his interest in such arithmetic, but to the sea itself, that it might let me speak clearly when the moment came. The sea remained indifferent as we crept forward at 8 knots. The Vigilant, S screws turning just loudly enough to mask the whisper of the U-boat, S electric motors but not so loud that we couldn't hear our own hearts hammering against our ribs. I stood rigid on the bridge, eyes fixed on the gyro compass, though my mind had already slipped its moorings and drifted into the depths below, where pressure built with every meter and oxygen thinned like hope in a sealed tomb. Mallory's voice crackled again through the voice pipe at 0703. Contact holding steady, speed estimated 3 knots. Depth uncertain, but likely below periscope level, possibly lying duggo. Lying duggo. The old submariners, trick shutting down nearly everything, letting the current carry you like driftwood, while your pursuers burned fuel and nerves chasing ghosts. Rugberg, if it was indeed him, was no novice. He'd sunk 17 ships across 3 patrols, a methodical predator, not prone to rashness, which meant he was either conserving battery for an attack or waiting for us to reveal the convoy's precise track. I glanced astern. The gray silhouettes of the merchantmen stretched into the haze, their masts wavering like reeds in a dream. The Empire Gannett still led the starboard column, its derrick swaying gently. On her decks, I imagined men boiling kettles, mending nets, writing letters home in cramped script, unaware that death might be gliding beneath their keels, listening to the creak of their cargo holds, like a lover to a heartbeat. Signa Chapelle, I said, my voice firmer now, though the dryness in my throat betrayed me. Suggest diversionary sweep to the north. We'll hold this sector. The oldest lamp blinked its coded reply within minutes. Acknowledged. Proceed with caution. Maintain 500-yard separation. Caution. The word tasted like ash. We had none left to spare. Every decision now was a wager with lives as stakes. I turned to Ensign Wallace, barely 20, his cheeks still soft with youth, despite the salt-crusted stubble. Prepare, Pattern Delta. Set depth to 75 feet. And Wallace, I paused. If we lose ASDIC contact, do not fire on instinct. Wait for my word. He swallowed, nodded sharply. His hands trembled as he adjusted the depth's charge rails. I saw myself, in him 3 years younger, standing on the quarterdeck of HMS Berwick during the Norwegian campaign, convinced that courage was a thing one could summon like a tide. Now, I knew better. Courage was the absence of flight when every nerve screamed to run. And sometimes, even that was not enough. At 0728, the ASDIC ping returned distorted, smeared, as though the contact had split or turned sharply. Mallory's voice came tight. Echo fading, sir. Could be thermocline interference, or he's diving deeper. Thermoclines, layers of water with abrupt temperature shifts that bent sonar beams like warped glass. We'd charted them as best we could from Admiralty bathymetric tables, but the North Atlantic kept its secrets well. My mind raced through probabilities. If Rugberg had dived below he might be invisible for minutes long enough to reposition, even to surface and sprint ahead on diesels if he dared. I made my choice. Helm. Come to 110 degrees. Engines, 12 knots. We'll cross his last known track. Aye, sir, came the reply. Steady, despite the strain in the helmsman's jaw. The Vigilant groaned as she heeled into the turn, her forecastle slicing through low swells, spray hissing against the hull like steam from a kettle. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sharp, metallic scent of distant rain. I braced myself against the chart table, fingers brushing the laminated convoy routing instructions, Admiralty Form 123, stamped eyes only. The weight of responsibility felt physical now. A second uniform layered over my skin, soaked in salt and dread. Then, sudden and sharp as a snapped cable, contact reacquired. Bearing 095, closing, fast speed increasing. He's running. My breath caught. Rugbug wasn't he hiding? He was bolting toward the convoy. Full ahead. Depth charge is ready. Wallace Pattern Delta. On my mark. The engine room answered with a deep-throated roar as the Corvette surged forward. Timbers shuddering. Deck plates vibrating underfoot. The ASDIC operator's chant became rhythmic, urgent. 200 yards. 180. 150. I raised my hand. The world narrowed to the cold metal of my ring, the one my mother had pressed into my palm the day I left Dartmouth, and the silent calculation in my skull. If I fire too soon, I miss. If I wait too long, he fires first. 100 yards. 90. 80. Mark. The depth charges rolled off the stern with a hollow clang, then the muffled thump of detonation deep below 3, then 4, then the 5th, a heartbeat later. The sea. Convulsed, a column of water, black and furious, erupted astern, raining icy spray across the quarter. The ship bucked like a spooked horse. Silence. Then, debris, sir. Oil slick, and wooden planks. Looks like bunks. A cheer started among the crew, but I cut it short with a raised palm. My eyes scanned the water. No bodies. No life rafts, just splintered timber and a spreading slick that shimmered with the iridescence of crushed beetles. Malar, anything on hydrophones? A long pause. Negative, sir. Just groaning. Metal settling. I nodded. But doubt, cold and serpentine, coiled in my gut. U-boats didn't break apart that cleanly, not unless they'd been mortally holed. And yet no explosion of compressed air, no catastrophic implosion reported by the hydrophones. Had I sunk him, or had he let me think I had? The convoy pressed on, oblivious. The fog thickened again, swallowing the horizon. I returned to the bridge rail, my greatcoat heavy with moisture, my lips moving soundlessly as I rehearsed the signal I'd have to send to Western Approaches Command. Possible U-boat destroyed. Convoy secure, but no sound came out, because in that moment, gazing into the gray void where sea met sky, I understood. The true enemy was not below the waves, but within the gnawing suspicion that in my hunger to atone, I had mistaken theater for truth. That cunning as a winter fox had sacrificed a decoy apiece of flotsam, a burst oil drum, and was even now circling wide. Diesel engines humming, heading not for the convoy's tail, but for its heart, and I had played my part perfectly. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a ship's whistle sounded low, mournful, like a voice calling through a wall of stone. I closed my eyes, felt the salt on my lashes. My lips moved again. Still, no sound.